Come the show's ending, Marlo Stanfield found himself in a very fortunate but also hellish position. He was lucky enough to depart from the game with not only his life, but also the millions of dollars he had made whilst king, which for anybody other than Marlo Stanfield would be a huge success. However, there's an issue, which is that Marlo doesn't care about money or freedom. Marlo only cares about his name ringing out on the street, and as proven in his final moments, his target audience no longer has a clue who he is.
He like, you all think
Fuck
you can...
you looking at?
You, nigga.
Do you know who I am?
Nigga, you know who I am?
Marlo's prison isn't the one Avon or Chris find themselves in. Rather, Marlo's prison is him being out on the street and nobody knowing his name. The king of nothing. Marlo is given an offer. Leave the game with all your assets. Never come back and the police won't come after you. Rear your ugly head, however, and the dirty case they have comes right off the shelf and you take your chances in court. Which leaves us with a question. What happens to Marlo Stanfield? Does he stick to the offer and leave the game for good? Perhaps he invests in some property and becomes a true businessman like his enemy Stringer Bell always wanted. Is it even possible for Marlo to live a life outside of the street? As mentioned in my video on Canard, some people are just too far gone. They are who they are, and to try place them somewhere else, or even attempt to have them do something other than make a living in the street, well, it's something that becomes more and more improbable the older they become. And finally, what's to say Marlo isn't killed by any of the dozen players he's made enemies with? Many are still in the street, and now that all of Marlo's muscle is either dead or in jail, they may think now is the perfect time to get their revenge. Do Marlo like Omar and Brother did Stringer.
I ain't involved. I ain't involved in that gangster bullshit no more.
The outcome we were led to believe, or at least what I interpreted on my first watch, was that of Marlo Stanfield fulfilling the dreams of Stringer Bell. He's a gangster able to transition from the illegal to the legal world, and with all the money he's earned from the game, he invests it into the harbour and makes a living working with the likes of Andy Krocek. And it truly is a likely outcome for several reasons. However, the most important is that Marlo wouldn't be in a position to get rain made similar to how Stringer Bell did, screwed out of all his money. And it's not because Marlo's more intelligent, but rather Maurice Levy wouldn't allow it, as if you remember correctly, it wasn't just Marlo Stanfield's freedom on the line, but also Maurice Levy's. If Marlo's case is brought before the court, so too is Levy's. And so it's in Maurice's best interest to keep Marlo legitimate, make sure he doesn't get played out of all his money, so that he both doesn't retaliate, thus getting the attention of the police, and also isn't forced to go back to the streets in order to make a living. And this is why you see Levy taking such interest in Marlo come the end of the show, feeding him the advice he never fed Stringer or Avon.
He's someone you're gonna want to know well. But kid, do not get in a room with him alone. You want me in there with you, believe me, otherwise guys like that will bleed you.
All that being said, there are still many factors at play that can have an effect on Marlo's ability to truly escape the game and become a successful businessman at that. And one of those factors is Marlo's psychology. Can a man who's seen what Marlo's seen, done what Marlo's done, truly put it all behind him and live a life outside of the street? And would he even want to? It's made clear in his final scene that his name doesn't ring out like he intended. And so do we really think a man with Marlo's temper would let something like that slide? Would his ego get the better of him, and almost force Marlo back out onto the streets in an attempt to have his name ring out? He has the funds to rebuild a crew, the balls to take any man's corner, and so what's stopping Marlo from basically resetting to the beginning of Season 3? The threat of prison almost definitely isn't an issue, as Marlo states to Vincent in Season 3 that he doesn't even care about dying so long as he wears the crown, and so why would the threat of jail time deter him from what can't be helped? Now one could argue that Marlo had already achieved his main goal, and so why would he feel inclined to try achieve it again? And for those who want to argue that Marlo can't help it, he was able to restrain his desire to become king for however many years as he patiently waited for the destruction of the towers. thus giving him the perfect opportunity to take the crown and all that Avon owns. And even if Marlo can't help himself, contrary to what I just said, all the money in the world would still struggle to buy Marlo a decent crew, as who would want to work with a man who has the reputation Marlo has, when they could work with the likes of Slim Charles and the Co-op? Personally, I don't believe Marlo makes another run at King, as he only cared about wearing the crown for a time and not forever. However, that isn't to say that he won't still wound up in prison. As Marlo states to Joe in Season 5, he isn't able to change up any more than Joe is. And so even if Marlo does end up a businessman, his easy to violence attitude and street-like mentality could still get him into trouble. Even with the protection of Maurice Levy, the smallest comment or action might rub Marlo the wrong way, and have him deal with an individual similar to how Stringer Bell wanted to deal with Clay Davis, potentially landing Marlo in jail for something that had nothing to do with his time as king. During Marlo's time at the top, he undoubtedly made many enemies, most of which he killed. However, there are still a handful roaming the streets, most of whom definitely still know his name. Slim Charles is one who many believe would eventually take his revenge for the murder of Prop Joe. He killed Cheese for that reason, so why not kill Marlo? Well, to clarify, Slim didn't kill Cheese solely for revenge. Rather, he killed Cheese mostly because he was an issue for the Co-op. If Cheese betrayed his own uncle, what's to say he wouldn't betray anybody else down the line? The man's about to serve a 20-year bid, and he could easily rat out the Co-op in an attempt to reduce his own sentence. And because of such, I honestly don't believe Slim would bother going after Marlo. As far as Slim is concerned, Marlo is retired and out the game. He's no longer an issue. And so why would Slim potentially create one? Awake a sleeping lion? If the hit goes wrong, he's got to look over his shoulder 24/7. And if the hit goes right, he's got to worry about the police. There's simply no benefit to killing Marlo. And this is exactly how Slim would see it. He's always been a man who does what's best for himself. And so why change that just to satisfy your need for revenge? Michael Lee is another player still in the streets and an enemy of Marlo Stanfield, who unlike Slim Charles I believe is more likely to take revenge, especially when you consider the fact that Michael's only on the run because Marlo was after him. Michael's had to sacrifice a life with his little brother Bug, all because Marlo Stanfield wrongfully accused him of snitching. And where Slim would weigh up the pros and cons of murdering a retired Marlo, Michael Lee more than likely wouldn't. He's been proven to hold grudges in the past, and so why wouldn't he hold one against Marlo? He killed the man who abused his little brother. He's almost definitely going to want to kill the man who forced his little brother out of his life entirely. To be honest, if Michael Lee doesn't take out Marlo, I honestly don't see him being taken out. Nobody knows who Marlo is anymore. And so he's not going to have to worry about somebody like Kennard popping one in his back. Nobody's going to gain anything from the murder of a kingpin nobody even remembers. Unlike Avon, Marlo isn't going to go down in the history books. My answer to this video's question goes all the way back to a quote Marlo spoke in Season 4, where he says,
You want it to be one way.
Man, I don't
You want
know
it
what
to
you...
be one
Man,
way.
stop!
Stop saying that.
But it's the other way.
which I believe perfectly sums up this character's ending. We as an audience want to see him suffer, similar to how we wanted to see a character like Joffrey suffer in Game of Thrones. However, The Wire doesn't work like that. There are no happy endings. Where a kind-hearted character like Dookie will go on to suffer, a ruthless killer in Marlo will more than likely go on to succeed. The game ultimately rewards the bad guys more than it does the good guys.